Come on.
Welcome back to the only podcast produced by 3 winners of IMSA's Spirit of the Race Award. Thank you for tuning in to the Check Engine Podcast. We're streaming through Anchor.fm or anywhere else that streams cool, fun, interesting podcasts that you all want to listen to. My name is Nick. I've got my 2 usual comrades here with me, Andrew and Tristan, but this episode we have a very special guest with us. We're excited to welcome from Twitter, the one and only ArtisanLoaf is here joining us via Skype. Thank you so much for joining us, sir.
Thank you very much for having me, and I'm pleased to announce that I got here just on the ground floor. I have written correspondence that says that I knew about this podcast before you become the biggest automotive podcast in the world. So glad to be here.
We just closed that last week. We had to do it.
Yeah.
we appreciate your confidence in us. That one episode that piqued us up there for one day, and we're already getting big heads. So we appreciate you jumping on. We've got a lot of things to talk with you about tonight. Andrew, I think, is going to be the one that wants to kick this thing off, though. So Andrew, whenever you're ready to jump into this.
Yeah, for sure. Now, Loaf, I first heard about your content. Either it was through Hoonable, or I think it might have been Camille, who works at Hooniverse, retweeted your stock market total adjusted camera index, and I have been obsessed with it ever since. It's completely mystifying to me, and it seems to be like it seems like some kind of fever dream work in a way. It seems so accurate, and that's where I want to start, man. I need to know about the camera adjusted index.
Okay. Right. Yeah. It started off as like, when we talk about anything, but like, especially cars, when we look, looking at historic stuff, like, 30 years ago, you see, a BMW M5 cost X amount. But it's not really that helpful when you can't think about, what were other cars at the same time? What was the general sort of, economy doing? So I came up with the idea that, well, how many Camrys could you buy for this? As a way of it's a real shorthand of, how much is something worth in a relatable context for people that, into cars.
Sure.
The Camry is a really good benchmark, especially in the US for the last 30 plus years. It's stayed in the same part of the market. The sales have been very consistent. So it's everyone knows what a Camry is, even though in hindsight, I was well, maybe I should have done a Corolla, because the Corolla is available everywhere else in the world as well, whereas the Camry, not so much. It's only just been reintroduced into the UK this year.
Sure.
After 15, 16 years of it not being available. So I was that was kind of the idea. And I was originally going to make a calculator where you could put in a price of something in what year, and it would convert it into Camry units.
So the Camry. So in this instance, the Camry is almost like the dollar to measure up against. It's like an exchange rate type.
Effectively, it's a way of it's a way of inflation is an imperfect measurement. So when you see the Federal Reserve, whatever, come out saying inflation's at 1.5%. for the year, when your grocery bill is up 5%, you can see that what official reported inflation is not necessarily representative of what you feel in your pocket. And I just thought, this will be a fun way to have a new measure of it in the most geeky way possible, I guess, a thing that you can do that's fun.
Yeah,
so
I absolutely love it. So we have you did it for the Dow Jones Industrial, and also for every world market basically at some point got involved.
Yeah, so last night I also did your suggestion and had a look at the expedition as well. I wasn't going to do it because it takes time to put this stuff together. But I was like, curiosity got the better of me when I started looking at the stats about the expedition. So I was like, okay, I was going to do it. So I can send that to you at some point. I don't know if I can send it to you right now.
Oh, that's all right. Yeah, anytime. I'd love to see that. I mean, that whole expedition example came about from Ford's shareholder meeting in what was that, March, I believe. They had a pretty little pie chart that showed, the expedition gained about 5% from 17 to 18. They were estimating where they got that 5% gain in that market, some from GM and Chevy. But just looking at that, I thought, all right, so 5% is about 14,000 more expeditions.
Yeah.
But even with that gain and Ford selling over that same period 44,000 fewer Focuses still outsold Expeditions 10-1. So one of the biggest things, one of the biggest things for me is, and kind of jumping ahead here, but it's like the myth of per transaction prices.
Right. Yeah. Okay. You're right on that. And the bit that really got me intrigued was the price of the Expedition has, since it was launched to today, the base sticker price is up 75%.
Whoa!
From what it
really
was. Yeah.
I mean, I say that, but I guess I don't know how that compares to other vehicles in that same time frame. But
this is where the sort of the comparison stuff comes in, because what I did, I'll go through the primary chart. I'm going to try and make this as concise as possible.
Sure.
What I did with that, the normalized chart that you see, that's full of every index. So what I did was I took and assumed what the base price was. I think it starts in 2006. This chart. What the base price of a Camry was in 2006 in US dollars. I converted that into the relative local currency. So it's in the euro, it's in the pound, it's in the Australian dollar, it's in the Japanese yen. And then I said, okay, if you take the value of a Camry and put that in the stock market, what would it have done over the last X many years? And then the chart shows you how many Camrys you could buy today based on your initial investment of a Camry.
Right.
So where you can see that if you put one Camry's worth of money into the Dow Jones, you would be very close to getting two Camrys at this point. Right, whereas if you put the same amount of money in, say, euros into the euro stock market, you would actually only be able to afford about 60-70% of a Camry now. Even though, I used the example of the UK market. The numbers that I've used are, they're rounded. They're not necessarily accurate, but it is illustrative. I'm not going to say this is 100% perfect data. It's not. It's just illustrative. If you say you, I'm reading my notes just to make sure I get this right.
Sure.
If you invested a Camry's worth of money into the UK stock market in 2006, you would only have 70% of a Camry today. Even though the market has gone up 25% in that time, the difference in the price of the Camry and the devaluation of the pound completely wipes out, and you lose money over that time, even though theoretically you're up 25%, but the value of the currency that the stock market's based in has gone down. So it's a way of actually compare the normalized chart is a way of comparing stock market performance over time, all in the same context.
Right.
So that's how you can see what's better and what's worse. So does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Makes a lot of sense.
Okay. So what I did then as well when you said about the Expedition, I did the same thing. So if using the Camry as the example, I can't do that because I haven't got the dates are different. Yeah. But if you'd put one Expedition worth of money into the stock market in 1997, the first year of the Expedition, you would now be able to buy almost two. So very similar to the Camry.
It is, yeah.
But that's over like an extra 10 years.
Oh, right. Of course.
So
Sure.
instead of 2006, it's 1997.
Yeah.
But if you'd have put that, what I did then beyond it, which is why I was up till stupid o'clock last night trying to figure out in a very tired state how to do this, how to get my maths right on this. If you'd have put that same amount of money into, you could have, at the time when in 1997, you could have bought about 1.7 Camrys for the amount of Expeditions around the same time.
Right.
But if you'd have put that money into the stock market in 1997, instead of buying 1.7 Camrys, you could now buy 4.5 Camrys.
Oh,
Because
wow.
the difference in price of the Camry over time is much less. It's up 40%, something 35%, 40% over the same period as what the Expedition say has gone up 75%. So you could buy a lot more Camrys today with your money than you could buy Expeditions.
Definitely. I mean, I feel like this is all leading to some huge climax, but maybe it's not. Like some decisive moment where we now know.
It's definitely not. I don't want to disappoint, but it just started off as a fun thing to do, and then it was like the more I started doing it, the more I was like, well, I wonder if I included this and did that and compared it to that. It's just a different way of looking at inflation, essentially.
Yeah, it's great. I absolutely love it.
Yeah, it's you're not going to draw anything statistically meaningful, although it does look like it in some cases of how like the stock market goes down, but it balances out. 1.5 Camrys is pretty strong. The market's pretty supportive at that level, but it is just an experiment with data to see what it looks like. It's to say there's nothing. I don't think there's anything particularly meaningful to be drawn from it, but it's just another way of looking at it.
Yeah, I'd still love it, but Tristan, you and I have gone back and forth a lot about Ford's fear of the word commodity. I mean,
Yeah, I would say back and forth is a bit too much. I think we're kind of on the same page with it, where we don't necessarily understand the fear of that phrase, and to a certain extent, this using it as an index, an index statistic. Any kind of car, you look at other things in the economy the same way. You look at, what's the cost of grain or whatever else. And using the cars as the index kind of would say, hey, they commoditize well. And they, why is Ford so afraid of, these cars being labeled as a commodity when, by definition, it's something that everybody needs. People are going to keep buying your product if it's a commodity, because commodities are, necessary more or less. And we're wondering where that fear is coming from.
Well, I was having to think about this, and the only sort of real logic I can come up with is they're very worried about people expecting to have some kind of software as a service or transport as a service functionality built into their vehicles. Essentially they're going to have to compete with, say, like the likes of Uber or Google or Apple. Even Apple now are getting into the automotive sphere, but they're looking at it from a very different angle than what a traditional manufacturer is going to look at, which they have even though mainstream manufacturers are all manufacturers essentially operate in like a cartel type situation. They compete against each other, but they also share a huge amount of technology. They co-develop platforms and all that. And even with that, it's still a really, really tough business to survive in. And then the idea that they're going to have to build up like a service, like a different kind of service infrastructure to actually deal with consumers directly. And these currently, like the businesses that are involved in it, say Uber, Lyft, even like Google and Apple, they're not making any money on these things, but they are creating a market. If you have if you have very slim margins to start with, you can't suddenly just expand your entire business model to incorporate this whole other thing that isn't even proven yet as a economic viability. But I don't really think that Ford has that much to worry about. I mean, maybe a little bit more now. I've looked at some of the sales data that Ford comes out with over the years of, say, how much market they seem to be losing. They just no one seems to care about. And that was one of the things I was actually going to say to you guys, because say I've been up in the US for a little bit, and okay, I'm in Michigan, and you don't see many Fords around these parts. Everything's General Motors, with a few Dodges and stuff like that. But there's no like F-150s are almost non-existent up here. It's really weird.
And that's so bizarre because obviously coming from the UK, the Fiesta has been the number one selling car there. What, 5 years or something like that? Longer even?
Oh well, the Fiesta is essentially an institution in the UK. It's been over 30 years. It's been one of the most popular cars in the country. Sometimes it goes down to like number 2 or number 3 or whatever, but it has forever been if you didn't want to pay the extra money and get a Volkswagen, a Ford Fiesta is the way to go, sort of thing. So they've been an institution for a long time. The Ford fan base in the UK is massive. So the old Fords now, old Fiestas command crazy money. It's like we don't have like the Mustang or anything like that, but people are into old Ford Escorts and Fiestas and stuff like that. That's what people, especially like my age and that grew up with these cars. So that's where our kind of enthusiast market goes is into these old economy Fords, which is kind of weird in the sort of when you look at like the US enthusiast market.
Right, of course. All right. So, sorry, when you were talking about Ford's fear of being a commodity, you pointed out something that I had entirely missed up to this point. I mean, hearing from the various Ford execs saying that they don't want Ford to become a commoditized, my thought was that they're using that as a shield to sort of direct people in a prestige path, sort of like Mitsubishi did, rather than more of a, hey, we're trimming back our lineup so you don't get to choose anymore. It's sort of one of those things where we're not a commodity, we're a special brand. But so I think it's really interesting to point out that it wouldn't necessarily be the physical vehicles that Ford would be making or not making commodities, but rather the nature of the whole concept.
Car ownership.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
I had never thought about it that way.
Well, it's one of those things that like Uber, I don't know if this still holds true today, but Uber was kind of clear when they first sort of became a mainstream force in the world that their long-term goal was to get rid of private car ownership. And how were they doing that? By leveraging private car ownership to make people be their own taxi service. But their ultimate goal was to get rid of private car ownership. So that is the kind of thing that I think that Ford is worried about, and they can see the tide is turning on that. People are less and less, people don't buy cars now anymore anyway. They lease them, so it's a whole different market. But as I say, at the same time, I don't think if Ford continues to make good vehicles, which I've had 2 Fords, and they were both perfectly fine vehicles. They're a bit older now, but they were still from the modern era of Fords. And they've been perfectly fine. But if they continue to make good cars that people can afford, then they're going to do all right. It's kind of like, Ford is worried about Apple taking over, but they're not looking at, Samsung is just a conduit for Google on phones, but people still have brand loyalty to Samsung. People still want to buy Samsung phones over the alternative, even though there's hundreds, if not thousands, of smartphone manufacturers. Samsung, because of the quality of their hardware, keeps its fan base, keeps its customers loyal. So I think Ford could do the same.
Yeah, I think it's something that Andrew, you and I have talked about in our discussions on this question, is that you mentioned if as long as they keep making good cars people can afford, and that's the question. Is that it seemed like when this whole plan to cut sedans and hatchbacks was announced, and it was seemingly meant to shift everything to the right and get people into higher margin SUVs, more expensive crossovers, things like that, where I wonder if that's they're not following through on your suggestion, and they're not they might still be making good vehicles, but they're not making good vehicles people can afford.
Well, if you look at take the Expedition as the example, say when it came out, it was near enough half the price of what it is today, and they sold I think it was over 300,000 or about 300,000 for the first like 3 years of production.
Wow.
That was each year, and then after
crazy.
Sorry, that's unbelievable.
You broke Andrew.
Yeah, but it's crazy. But now they're selling what? Now they're happy about getting an extra 5,000 units sold.
Yeah.
I think they sold was it 14,000 they sold last year or something like that?
14,000 more year to year.
Yeah, well,
year over year.
They've doubled the price almost, but they've also, they're selling a quarter of what they used to sell. So is that good? I don't think it is.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's so. I guess what it always comes back to me in terms of like this ride sharing thing, and you can definitely give us a different perspective coming from a whole different country. But living where we live, there is ride sharing, yes, but even I live 30 minutes outside of a big city, and people don't Uber out here. They don't use Lyft.
You're very near. Even your hometown has what? 2 or 3 college campuses in it.
Yeah,
and still nobody uses it. I mean, it's not the main city, but it's a big town, and it's not a popular thing there. At least,
right.
Yeah.
So I guess what I'm thinking is this fear that Ford and other companies have, where if they don't enter into ride sharing, if they don't become that commodity, someone else will take that market space. I mean, is that sort of a coast to coast city focused mirage where we're kind of ignoring the entire middle of the country where it would make zero sense? I can't Uber or Lyft to work because it's just too expensive. Like it's not even practical.
Yeah, I don't think these are with all of these kind of things, it is very urban centric. Ride sharing makes a lot more sense in urban environments than it does, in the rest of Middle America, it definitely doesn't make sense. And the same is the case in anywhere that's got a sparsely populated or relatively sparsely populated area. So I think the importance of it is probably that is much more minimal. But at the same time, the cities are they are the population centers. They are huge demographics that also are wealthy as well, and they I would guess they buy more cars more often. People in cities, rather
sure.
People where I'm at the moment now, people are rolling around in trucks that are 20, 30 years old without a problem. It's not, but whereas if you're in a city, there's a lot more keeping up with the appearances and trying to stay ahead of fashion, which is where like the Tesla Model 3 and stuff. It's a very fashionable item to have, and in places where style is important more than anything else, or more compared to a lot of things. Those kind of markets do really well, but when you're looking in more, say, rural environments where a vehicle is 99% just a tool, it's not a fashion statement in any sense. It's just, how much utility can I get out of my transport? So I don't think that, what's happening in the more rural areas isn't going to change, but I am very convinced that in urban centers, car ownership is going to really keep dropping. It's going to keep going down and down and down because it's just going to be so difficult. If I lived in a city, like if I lived in London, I used to live in London, and if I didn't need a vehicle for work, I wouldn't have one because it's so expensive and so difficult to travel. You are better off using public transport or getting taxis or taking the bus. And the more and more regulations to come in to make it more expensive. So it's just going to price people out of having it. And that is, companies like Ford are going to lose a lot of market share from that. And it seems like with, say, the cutting of the passenger car market to almost nothing, they accept that people in cities are not going to buy their cars anymore, but they will buy their SUVs and trucks in the rest of the country.
So just thinking about London specifically, I mean, isn't Ford cutting cars to appeal to a market, using cities as an example, specifically London, to appeal to a market that wasn't buying cars in the first place? I mean, isn't it basically like we see people in cities are buying fewer cars, which probably has to be true, yet I feel like specifically in Europe, people in cities were buying few cars in the first place, and I could be totally off on that.
And the ones that they were buying, those weren't going to be, unless you're rolling like a footballer or something like that, they're not going to be SUVs and crossovers for the most part in the city. They're going to be city cars and small vehicles, and they're cutting those. Afraid of losing cities, they're going to stop making the only cars that are being sold in cities.
Well, they're not cutting those cars in Europe, as far as I'm aware. So
yeah, even in the US, yeah.
Yeah, but I haven't looked at it. But what are the sales numbers of the Focus and the Fiesta, stuff like that? They're not great, are they? I was really surprised to see the amount of first generation Focuses around it. It's a really odd thing. Not a car that I would assume was very popular in the US, but apparently I'm wrong.
Yeah, it was very popular. Hey, let's move off of Ford. We're bored with Ford.
Yeah, let's shift to another.
That's more their problem, I think.
Right.
Let's shift to another brand that's kind of in the middle of or they're trying to change position. They're in the middle of that right now, and it's a brand that kind of confuses me, Loaf, sometimes, is Mazda. Just kind of where they sit in the overall auto sphere. They're a little bit upstream of your typical Toyota, Honda. They're not quite to Lexus, Acura, but they keep pushing towards luxury when it doesn't seem like the actual cars themselves fit the message they're trying to send. So the question here is, why is Mazda continuing to push up market, and is it a sensible strategy?
I think it is actually a sensible strategy, but with all the strategies that I've ever seen Mazda have, for whatever reason, they've never managed to really deliver on it. I say this as someone.
Oh, right. Another thing in this question is that I missed is it a believable shift? Are they actually going to deliver on it?
I mean, I think they could. They have everything they need to make it happen. I don't know what their problem is, because I'm a huge fan of Mazda. Like the first car I really remember, my parents having, was a Mazda, and they had a MX-5, and then they got one of the Mazda pickup trucks as well. So I've been kind of through the range and years with Mazda. I've also rented some of their more newer cars, and I have to say, not the brand new one, but the last generation Mazda 3 is an amazing car to drive. It's so comfortable. I drove the whole length from Miami all the way up to northern Michigan in one of those, and it was the most enjoyable experience I've ever had in a rental car. It was great. I can't fault it for anything. It was so driving 800 miles in one day, and it was comfortable the whole time. It was a crazy experience compared to other vehicles I've done similar journeys in. It was by far and away the best. I mean, obviously, if you get a more premium car, it's probably going to be better. But for that kind of price point, there's not one thing I could fault with it except not being able to work out how to lock the boot. But that's kind of
sure.
So I mean, but can't they just accept and kind of push the fact that they're that good at that price point instead of trying to push their price point up?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they could do it, but they need a serious marketing push behind them to do it, and they don't. I would assume they don't have the money to do it. They're not a big enough manufacturer to really do that. It's just a real shame, I think, because the Mazda 3 and the Mazda 6 have been good cars for a really long time, but no one cares about them except the Miata. That's all people think of Mazda for, and it seems to getting everything else just seems to get ignored. And the fact that they weren't able to transition, they weren't able to capture the market they should have done with that, does not bode well for them going into a more upmarket side of things, even though they have everything they need to make it happen. They have the technology, they have the designers, they have the Mazda brand is not, it's not worthless. People like the Mazda brand. It's just they don't buy them for some reason.
Well, it's one of those interesting things where they've seemed kind of aimless after they broke away from that partnership with Ford. But then they've dipped their toes into performance with Mazda Speed, and they dipped their toes into making the Everyman's car, co-branding. I mean, they've tried all of this stuff just over the past 15 years, and at the end of the day, right now, Mazda is winning on racetracks, which is awesome. I mean, suddenly in IMSA this year, they're just on absolute fire, but they don't have a performance car in their lineup, and they want to push up market, but they don't really have a luxury car. Like, no one's looking at a Mazda 6 against anything from Lexus. It's just, it seems like they can't stick to anything.
Yeah, so it's there. No one's shopping a Mazda 6, say, with a BMW 5 Series. They're looking at They're looking at next to a Camry. That's what people, I would imagine, or an Accord or something like that. So, and when you do that, the Mazda, in my opinion, comes out usually looking really, really good.
Right, of course.
And they still haven't managed to sell that many of them. And I don't have an answer for why, but it doesn't bode well for their, trying to go up market. Because, even like Lexus has been, in that business for 30 years now.
Sure.
And they're still way down the list compared to like the German luxury makes as far as sales go. So right. And they've delivered some of the best cars in that segment as far as the original LS400, the original IS200, even the GS, the earlier ones of those. They were amazing cars. They're really good, and they stand up to the test of time. But that didn't translate into they're still in the same sort of field as like something like Alfa Romeo or something that is just a gimmick. It's just style over substance. But
yeah, I feel they
Lexus got the substance, but no
they
bias.
run into the same issue that, and I think Mazda's going to run into the same issue that Lexus did, where I would say there are a few groups of car people that are super clannish, be it truck people or what have you, but luxury car people are some of the worst. Like, I think you're going to be very hard pressed to have someone jump ship from their S class to a 7 Series Mercedes to an A8. I mean, they kind of stick there, and I think that might be part of Lexus's problem was, even with as long as they've been doing it, how late to the luxury sedan game they were. The places where you see them really stick out are the non-sedan cars. We were looking at the LC when we were in New York, for example, and that is a fantastic looking car. Like, I would buy that, but I'm even only this far into my life, if I make all the money and go buy a luxury car, I'm going right to the Audi dealer first, because that's what I grew up with, and but that's if I'm buying a sedan. If I'm looking at something like the LC, nobody really makes anything quite like it, and I think despite the fact that that's true, people are super clannish when it comes to luxury cars, and I fear that with Lexus just now clawing their way into that space, I don't know if that's going to leave any room for Mazda to try to do the same. That was my concern.
Well, I think too, like, Lexus has the resources of the mighty Toyota behind it too, to keep kind of pushing upstream. Whereas, as you said, Mr. Loaf, like, the Mazda doesn't have any of that. And even if they did have the resources and they did have some, like, a well thought out strategy to try to penetrate, upstream from where they're at, that market, that luxury sports market, is so saturated. Is there even room for them to make a dent if they get there? Like, where would they end up? Like, where are they trying to land? Well,
I think the way you have to look at this, or a way to look at this, is you look at what happened with the new NSX, and it's a great car. There's very little to complain about it, I think, from what I've seen, what I've heard. Mm-hmm. But no one's going to buy one, and no one has bought one. And that it doesn't matter how good it is. It's not. It just doesn't have the appeal, even though it looks great and it probably drives amazing. It has every box you can tick, like a Mazda, but it just doesn't inspire people in any way. And Mazda's even worse, kind of like Lexus. The more I think about it, like the LS. Has always been a pretty good car. I don't know about the newest ones, but the 90s, early 2000s ones were really good. But they didn't do their own version of like an S8 or an AMG S65. They just did the LS400 and take it or leave it.
Right.
That could have, if they'd done something like that, which they've done more recently, with things like the LFA and the the F ones, the sport ones that they do now.
All the F sport ones.
Yeah, but it's kind of too little, too late. They had the time to establish themselves earlier on with that, but they didn't. They were too busy trying to be, Japan's Rolls Royce rather than, Japan's BMW, or Audi, which is something that probably would have made them made a bigger dent on the map rather than, because they're not appealing to performance buyers. It's just luxury, whereas the Germans do both.
Right. Exactly.
Well, then I guess there's only one more question about Mazda. When does Renault Nissan buy them?
With the mess that's going on there, I don't think anytime soon.
Yeah, don't say that. They got a chance. Don't kill them.
Well, that would be. I would laugh if that happened. That would just be the end.
That's a sad fate for any.
I would laugh and cry.
Yeah. I mean, we got a bunch of questions about Tesla. We're going to throw all those away. I'm just going to ask you one question about Tesla, Loaf. Are you in or out?
Oh, I'm out. I'm not.
Yes. Yes.
We know.
I am not in. I have no financial position in Tesla. I never have. I've never been. I've never been in the automotive industry for work. I've considering it, because I have my own businesses and stuff like that. So, it's always, because it's a hobby, it's always like, oh, I'd like to get into the industry, but I've never been involved in it. And for me, when I first started reading about like Tesla and stuff like that, it was a nice escape because I'm involved in the financial markets for the last like 3 or 4 years, just to get a break from the having to read the geopolitical goings on to know what's happening in the markets. Mm-hmm. So, Teslas are this light, fun story. It's an interesting narrative. And then this fucking, sorry, I probably shouldn't swear.
You can swear as much as you would like.
We have a lovely expletive label we can throw on. Well, every episode that we've done so far.
So I was going to ask you before we started if I was, because when I'm doing the podcast, I try and be professional, but they slip out now and again.
No, we brag about the fact that we're not pros, so be as unprofessional as you'd like.
You do a good job of sounding like pros, so I'll give you that.
Well, thank you.
I appreciate that.
It's a well done.
We're
podcast.
in trouble. We're in trouble.
Sorry, we interrupted you there. You were saying, what were you saying? Something interesting. I think you were talking about maybe the CEO. I don't know.
Yeah. But you say when you start reading about this, because when I first started, I didn't really, I didn't have an opinion. It was an interesting thing. I'd heard about it, what Tesla was doing, and thought, I'll read about this because I'm into the car industry. I've been a lifelong fan of cars and trucks and everything else. It's like, oh, great, a new automaker. That's something that I can really get behind and stick my teeth into and learn about this. This is great. This is good. Even though I'm not, the EV revolution, especially when I started, I didn't care. But they say then you end up in this rabbit hole of pro-Tesla, anti-Tesla, and everything else. And if anyone's read my Twitter feed, they'll know I'm definitely more on the Tesla skeptic side. But Indeed. That is just that's just a conclusion I came to. I started off much more optimistic, and then the more you read and the more things that happen, and it's like, okay, this is not really this. There's something more to this, and that's what a lot. When you see a company that's been around for now 15, 16 years has lost over $6 billion in that time.
Oh.
Yeah,
cumulative figures. Oh,
yeah. So that's how much over the course of Tesla's existence they've lost $6 billion. But if they make a couple of $100 million in one quarter, that's a victory.
Oh,
and it's just forever. And then you get the things like the Solar City thing, where basically Musk got Tesla to buy another company that he was heavily involved and invested in to stop them going bankrupt, and Tesla assumed their debt, and that was a warning sign because his cousins ran the company. He was heavily involved in it. He was the chairman, and he suddenly came up with a great idea that they should merge the two companies together right at the time when things were getting really bad. And since then, basically, Tesla has just wound down their solar operations with the idea that one day they'll have this magical solar roof that everyone's going to have. And then you get things like the Semi and the new Roadster 2 that's going to fly, and
definitely.
And the
Definitely
things that
fly.
Are you with us, Loaf, that you think flying cars are just fake? That's never going to happen.
Yeah, it's not in any way that has been described so far. I don't think that's so far out of the realm of the practical realities that we live in. flying cars are not. It's not something I'm going to be thinking about. I wonder when Toyota's going to get onto this. Yeah, it's not a practical thing in the world. But then you also with like the Tesla stuff, you have Elon Musk's personal behaviors of how he even came into Tesla by he invested early on and then basically pushed the original founders out and then managed to get a legal settlement which named him as a founder, even though he wasn't at the table.
Really?
He wasn't at the table when the company got founded. He put money in. I think it was about maybe 6 months, a year after it got founded, and then he used his unique skills to get himself into the head of the company. Has now become this figurehead for the future for some reason. So, and then you say with the things like he's done with the guy in Thailand and the submarine thing. It's just like the more you sort of read into it, it's like this is stupid. This is silly. There's nothing like you could. I have no problem if you think the cars are great and you want to do whatever you want to do. They're super powerful. 0 to 60 is really good. Everything about them. If you like everything about the cars, that's fine. But the cars themselves and the company are not the same topic of discussion. And that's where a lot of people, because they love the cars so much, they will do everything and anything to defend them. And that's kind of it's a very strange situation where you have this seemingly thousands of people that are, an army defending Tesla and Elon Musk from any slight criticism.
Yes.
Like today or the other day, there was a story. Inside EVs came out with a story saying, well, I think it was actually from Seeking Alpha, but Inside EVs republished it. It was a story just saying, well, the Tesla pickup truck is going to have, a tough sell for reliability. They're going to have to really show their work. Mm-hmm. They're going to have to demonstrate that this is a real competitor to existing trucks. And the Tesla fans, beyond furious that they would talk down about a Tesla product before it's even out. Just saying that, well, maybe they're going to have a hard sell on this. Look at how Ford has dominated the market for decades.
Let's look at how fetishized the reliability, the single reliability. GM ran the longest running trucks on the road for like 15 years.
Mm-hmm. In a segment where reliability is one of the number one selling points. You're going to have to prove that to anybody shopping in that segment. I don't think that's. I mean, you could even be optimistic and say, look at some of the things that people have done with Teslas, and they've, that there's that guy in Quebec that put on a zillion miles as a taxi driver, and it's like, if he can do that, why can't they build a pickup truck? You could even be optimistic about it, and I bet the Tesla fans would be like, well, how dare you question it even this early? It's weird to see such a rabid fan base. Rabidly defensive.
They say they turn on, and the thing is, things like Inside EVs and the situation like with electric and Fred Lambert.
Oh yeah,
he makes some valid criticisms very late because they personally affected him. And it's like people literally say he is a traitor to the cause.
Wow,
that is what people have said. People
they
arrange boycotts against.
What is the cause though? What is the cause?
Accelerate the world's transition to sustainable energy and eventually live on Mars for some reason.
Okay. All right. I hear you.
Loaf, I think it starts at the top though, because how many there's been reviews of the Model S or Model 3 that have gotten like a B review or like a 4 out of 5, where then Musk turns around and just blasts that publication publicly for not giving them a perfect starts at the top, right?
Yeah, exactly. That is the thing. Elon Musk will come out and say what he's done with Ed Niedermeyer. Says, oh, well, he lies, he does this, he does that. And it's like, well, okay, what is factually incorrect in his writing? Well, let's not worry about that, but he's probably funded by people that are against Tesla and are betting against them, so we can't listen to anything he says. Mm-hmm. And, he wrote a few articles in 2009 saying that, Tesla, might not be long for this world, so no credibility about anything he ever writes. And but Musk promotes this. He sends his army of Twitter and Reddit people after people by just saying look at this person is, talking down about us when we're just trying to make the best cars in the world. It's got 5-star safety rating. You can't say anything bad about that.
Oh, no. You wait, Loaf. No. Don't you sell them short. It's not 5 stars. If they had 6, now
Very true. Very true. If there was such a thing, Tesla would get it according to them. Yeah.
And who knows if this is even possible, would a CEO change or figurehead leadership change make you think differently?
I think Tesla has tremendous brand value. Out of all the things that they have, the brand is good. They could I don't think in the situation they are, how they run their business now it's never going to work. It's been an advantage, especially in the early days, but now it's just a hindrance, especially the selling directly, not having dealerships, because they can't expand. Even if they have all this demand that they claim they do, they can't expand fast enough to service it. And they've done very little to really expand their service since the Model 3 came out, even though they've doubled their fleet size. And they only have themselves to work with. They have nothing else but themselves. So there's no dealerships involved. Possibly, maybe there's some other things going on in like China and stuff. But as far as the company line goes, they do everything themselves. But they can't expand enough. They do not have the resources to be able to actually deliver the experience that customers want and what they expect. Because when it was a niche manufacturer early on, and the world accepted they're going to lose money at the moment, they could go the extra mile and really make customers feel valued. And that has completely gone out the window now. This is from customers of Tesla that talk to me and say, as soon as my warranty ran out, it's, they're done. They're not helpful to you at all. And now they've basically tried to do away with customer service. You can't call up with a problem with Tesla. You have to use the app now. There are ways to call them, but if you ever get the phone answered is another question. But the official protocol is, if you want to book a service appointment, you have to use the app. If the app works, well, that's a roll of the dice. So they're not going to be able to deal with this. What they should have done, in my humble opinion, is have flagship stores in London, New York, Paris, major global cities, have flagship stores that they run, and they can deliver that top line customer service. But also in other areas, let the Alfa Romeo, Jaguar, other dealership also sell Teslas. They would sell so much more, and they would also massively reduce their costs, because right now they have to pay everything themselves. Whereas if they ran the dealership, the dealerships take on a load of that responsibility. So they could expand so much more without really spending anything. If anything, because the franchises are going to pay, the dealers are going to pay, Tesla to have their branding, they'll make money off it and they'll expand their footprint. Whereas at the moment, they can't do anything. And, customers are left completely out of, without any options. Because especially, I'm sure you guys have done it. You've been to, you've got a car and you've gone to the dealership and they've not given you the service you want. You can just go to another dealership.
Right, of course.
If you've got a warranty problem, it doesn't. If you've got a Ford with a warranty problem, it doesn't matter, or any other problem. It doesn't matter what dealership you go to. You can choose. You have the freedom of choice of which dealership you want to use. If you have a bad experience at one, you can go to another. When it's a Tesla tell you which service center you have to use. That's it. You don't get if you don't get an experience, if you don't get the customer service, you have a problem with whatever at the service center. That's it. You can't go to another Tesla service because you're not on their books. You're not in their zone. Jeez. So you're done. So that's for all the I had a problem with the car dealership recently that tried to sell me a complete lemon that was unsafe and everything like that, and for probably 3 times what it was worth. So I'm never going to defend dealerships, but I have the choice. If that dealership gives me bad service, I can go to another one and I can complain to Ford or whoever it happens to be to say this dealership is damaging your brand by how they treat customers. Whereas when it's Tesla, you can only complain to them. There's no real accountability. It's just this sort of brick wall of what Tesla's comms side, its customer relations side, is just a black box. Some people do really well, some people don't do very well, but you have no recourse. You just have to you get what you get, and that's it. So that's not in the mass market. That is not going to translate very well. So I think Tesla has a huge opportunity, and they could be a force to be reckoned with for the long term. But the whole business does need restructuring. But that brand value is really strong.
Right.
You know, it almost makes me feel bad.
No, go ahead, Nick.
Yeah, sorry. It almost makes me feel bad for the folks who are the engineers and the designers who are working there day in and day out, because they really are doing some great things. Like we've talked about on our podcast a lot, how we've been out on EVs and not necessarily like the long-term solution. But when you just take the name off of that car and you just look at that EV versus the other ones on the market, it looks better. It performs as well or better. Like they're doing some great things day to day, hands on, and they just have this dope at the top who has no idea how the car business works, and it's just devaluing what a lot of really smart and really inventive people are actually doing.
Yeah, Tesla couldn't have got to where it is today without Elon Musk. And what Elon Musk has done, I've said this on every podcast I've been on, is incredible. He has done things, even removing the hyperbole about landing rockets and all that kind of stuff. He has done things that very few people would have ever imagined possible. To start a new automaker in the US, in California, and manage to crank out 500,000 cars in a few years. If you've gone back to you've gone back to 2003 when Tesla first came out, I very few people I think would have been oh yeah, they're going to be a leader in the industry in some aspects in a few years' time.
Right.
And they are going to, regardless of what people say, Porsche, Volkswagen, obviously they're the same thing, but Porsche and Jaguar are looking at Tesla, looking at their market and saying, how can we get these customers? How can we do what they're doing? They are competition. They are not the normal competition, and they are not necessarily the best competition. It's not like say when you have the golden era in like Japan or something, when you've got Toyota and Honda and Nissan all working really hard to make the better car than the other people. Tesla just does its own thing, and other people can take bits from it and then try and put it into their own thing. But this is the problem I have with a lot of the Tesla super fans, that unless a company does exactly the way Tesla does it, then they're not really serious about their EVs, unless they compete on exactly the same level as Tesla as far as range 0 to 60 times and not having a grill. That's a really, really important thing. If a car has a grill, it is why even it might as well be a horse and cart. That is for some reason that is how these people look at it. If you have a grill on your EV, you clearly didn't really want to make this car, did you? Because Teslas don't have a grill, so and that's not the point. The EVs are an emerging market. Tesla is, in many ways, leading that market. Not entirely, but they are definitely setting the benchmark. And that's really where I think they should have done. They should have been this more aspirational, which obviously is what they are anyway, but they should have really just stuck to that. They made the Roadster, made the Model S, and say, this is what can be done. This is what we're really good at. And that's it, rather than being, we're going to take over the entire industry. We're going to make cars, we're going to make trucks, we're going to make, semis, we're going to make everything. So no, make really good cars that demonstrate what the technology capabilities are, and that's it. And you can be they could have been like the Alfa Romeo or the Maserati or something, but with better reliability of the EV world. So this is something that you can aspire to. This is a goalpost to say this is styling, this is performance. Now so the rest of the world shows what you can do. But trying to actually compete on every single level the same as a traditional automaker to try and justify their existence of why they're not making money just yet is, and now obviously with the robo-taxi thing, it's just fantasy. It just the reality of making cars is not it's a different world of making $35,000, $40,000 cars than it is making $150,000 performance Model S's and Roadsters. It's a whole different world. And not only get so, well, we kind of get in there with that, but if we then say make a big truck and make this and make that, then we'll be where we need to be. They should have been the technology leader. They should just, they should not. The other examples were actually bad. They should be the Porsche of EVs. They say, this is what we can do. We're better than everyone else at this specific thing. Let everyone else pick the pieces of the rest of the market. No one needs Porsche to make 1,000 different cars. They can make the 911, they can make the Cayenne, and they could probably do away with the Cayman maybe. But they don't need this massive range. They lead their particular niche with a very focused approach, and that's what Tesla should have done rather than trying to be everything to everyone.
Well, and the Porsche market is nothing to scoff at. I mean, just the Boxster and Cayman alone could easily float the sales equivalent to that could float the entire Tesla business in probably 2 years. I mean, those cars sell like crazy all over the world. Yeah. Maybe not 6 billion, but
I was going to say 6 billion is a big hole.
Maybe not 6 billion. Let me take that back.
But that's where the people have a problem. Especially the real vocal critics of Tesla have that problem because Tesla is a company that's lost billions and billions of dollars over the years, but is still valued, say, at a similar value to Ford and GM and more than some of the other automakers, despite having a fraction of the volume and losing loads of money and having an unproven business model. And people are like, well, Tesla cannot be worth $40 billion, $50 billion because they sell cars and lose $1 billion in a year doing it. That doesn't make any sense. And then the idea that the Elon Musk's companies, are always out for a subsidy. Any market where there's a subsidy in, they're going to go for it. And I can understand how people feel slightly annoyed that they're paying their full tax rate, and then someone's getting $7,500 off their tax bill because they bought a $150,000 Tesla. It's like, that is not a way to encourage EV adoption. That is just, say that's a subsidy truffle hound of an approach to things. So that's why people are really, they see that all the problems that you or I see on the sort of service level, and then they say, well, how does the economics of this make sense? How does this business actually work? And when you say, well, the business doesn't work, but somehow it's valued at the same kind of level as a company that sells 10 times or even more times the amount of vehicles, has 4 or 5 even more times the amount of revenue, and make a profit and pay a dividend, and they're valued the same. It's like, well, this just doesn't. There's no way this makes sense.
I don't understand.
Yeah.
Well, if it doesn't make that much sense, we said we wouldn't take up too much of your time with Tesla. So I
really didn't mean for that to happen. But thank you for indulging.
Let's bounce to the next question.
Yeah. I personally learned a lot.
So I try not to talk about it so much now because it's just I'm kind of sick of it myself. Really, it's like I keep getting dragged back into it, but it's like I'm kind of done with it. I've got I have formed my opinions. I know it's going to take to change them. I'm just going to let it really see how it plays out. It's too tiring to deal with because it's as bad as political Twitter.
Oh yeah. Oh,
it totally is. So people can believe it. I'll talk to people about it, but I'm not going to be getting into public debates over is Elon Musk advancing humanity or not.
Right. Earlier in the podcast, we just mentioned transactional profits a little bit, and I guess I just want to go back to that because my impression of all these companies, especially the companies who are paring back lines like Ford, presenting everything to their shareholders in terms of transactional profits, it comes across as sleight of hand. Is that really what's going on?
Well, I think Ford seems to have taken a really drastic approach to it with basically cutting their entire passenger car line. But if you look at the German manufacturers, you look at BMW or Mercedes and even Audi now as well, the lineup bloat is incredible. Yeah, there's you can buy your Mercedes by the inches. I want one that's this long and this wide. Okay,
Right,
you get this
right.
one. And I think that's kind of what Ford had done as well. They just bloated their lineup. They've got they've got what 4 or 5 different crossovers, and then they've got the SUVs, then they've got the cars, and it's just like you don't need that many choices. Obviously it's great for customers to have choice, but the amount of investment required to make these kind of sales, and they've been cannibalizing their own markets. And I think that's like what happened with the Expedition, because they then started introducing smaller and mid-sized crossovers. The same sales that they would have had just got split to 3 or 4 different models. Mm-hmm. But that just means they don't make as much money, because the cost of having to make all these different production versions. That's a big cost to make these different ones. So I think it's they've gone too drastic with it, but having a real serious discussion and trimming the lineup was probably a good thing. Possibly not as extreme as say what like Dodge has done,
Oh, and well, to be fair, I don't think they paired their lineup. I just think they were making crap cars and no one bought them.
I think is it the Jeep Compass or something like that came out, I don't know, about 10 years ago.
Tristan,
it's like the compact.
Yeah, it was on the Caliber platform. They just re-released it.
The Patriot.
It's the worst car I've ever been.
Yeah,
quite literally the worst car. And I've been in a lot of bad cars. I've traveled the world. I have driven Chinese cars, and they're a lot of fun actually. Because they're super light and they're easy to throw around. But that Jeep is the worst, most uncomfortable. Just nothing. There's literally no redeeming features about it whatsoever. But they somehow managed to sell lots of them. And that's the kind of thing that baffles me about the US market, especially. You buy some really awful cars, and I don't know why. There's a spectrum. Obviously, it's not that it's good cars and bad cars, but say that the Chrysler lineup for the last 10+ years has been rubbish. There's been nothing redeeming about, as far as I'm concerned, nothing redeeming about it whatsoever until you get to, say like the Challenger or something like that. Mm-hmm. But the actual, say, the Jeeps and the Chryslers, garbage. Don't know why anyone ever bought.
Yeah, it's the very high tiers of their line. Those are fine. When you get to Grand Cherokees and Wranglers and in Jeeps, and you get to 300s in Chryslers, and you get to some of the higher end Dodges. Those make sense, and the trucks are good. But then they have this logarithmically declining quality the further you go down the line. To arguably, I test drove one when I was considering getting a car. I was like, oh, a little Jeep, that sounds fun. Wow, was I ever wrong? Dismal, the worst CVT in the world, ergonomics that even my T-Rex arms couldn't handle. Like, nothing was in the right place. It absolutely dismal, and that's, you come from there all the way up to the highest luxury edition Grand Cherokee, which is well regarded compared to things even like Land Rovers and Range Rovers. I mean, when they come into that trim, they're up there hitting with those big boys all the way down to an actual piece of flaming garbage. So it's mind-boggling.
Complete waste of brand reputation, really.
Yes.
Well, I think that's why they sell, is the brand reputation, because the Wrangler and the Cherokee, are so loved and so revered. It's like, well, if it says Jeep on it, it's automatically going to be like a Wrangler and it's going to be great. Well, not really, but they can survive on that brand recognition. And I think one piece of that too, Loaf, is that, and I was talking with the guys about this. This was early on last year, maybe. Like, you wonder why people buy bad cars, because I think most of the general market aren't car people. It's just something to get them to work and back and to the grocery store. And if it's cheap enough and if it looks cute or whatever the reason is, then they'll go for it.
It comes in the right color. They like the red. That's right. Good enough. That is ultimately how a lot of people do buy cars, which it's frustrating, but it's also fine. You know, I'm not expecting every car to be, a driver's car or have kind of a real luxury feel to it. You know, I really like rubbish cars, to be honest. You know, I do like cheap Euro boxes. They are completely fine by me. Like what Renault has done with Dacia is brilliant. I thought they have done so well out of all the things that they've done wrong. Renault, Nissan. But
and they just listened to James May.
Yeah, well, what they did with Dacia, the Dacia is one of the most popular cars in France, I think, because you can buy a brand new car for like €8,000, and that's good enough, and it comes with a 4-year warranty or whatever it is, and well, why am I going to spend 3 times that on a Volkswagen Golf? When I could just, this is still going to get me from A to B, and that's, that is a much more of the sort of European market is much more practical and very, much less in the like sort of brand status kind of thing. It sort of goes to the extremes. You either get people that are very happy, buying Dacias or buying Fiats because they're super cheap, and then if you're going to spend any more money, well, then you might as well buy an Audi, because like in the Europe, you can buy an Audi A1, which is not that expensive compared to, I say like a Volkswagen Golf. It's a bit smaller or whatever, but if you want that brand status, it's very, very cheap to get into a premium brand in Europe. Whereas I think in the US, it's a little bit more difficult because they don't have the range in the same way.
Right. You start at the A3. Good luck. So
yeah.
One thing I noticed when I wrote a blog about the difference between selling SUV or CUVs on the same market as cars. So obviously here in America, something like the Hyundai Kona, which is a subcompact SUV, is marketed up against something like the Hyundai GT or the Elantra. So it's basically a class down in size, but price comparable with the class above. And I guess I'm just wondering, obviously that's kind of where the transactional profit comes in, but I'm just wondering if that kind of thing is pushing the used market. I mean, people come to a lot and see the smallest SUV starting at $25,000 or a mid-sized car. Maybe they don't want the car, and they just kind of go to the used lot. You know what I mean? Is the cost difference, price increase is the price increase on CUVs that are now flooding the market driving people to buy used instead of look at a new car?
That's a tough question. I don't think I have an answer for that. What I would say though is, for the manufacturers, it makes a lot of sense, because say they can make cars that are effectively the same size and the same cost to make as the class comparable one, but because it's that little bit taller, they can add the sort of perception of, an SUV is worth more than a car, even though they really don't cost that much different to make. They are basically the same, especially a crossover that just has a slightly higher ride height and a bit more plastic on the on like the bumpers or whatever. So it's in the manufacturer's best interests to give this perceived increase in quality and everything. Say, you buy an SUV is a better choice for you, because they can charge a little bit more and make a little bit more money on just the perception that they're more valuable, even though they are basically the same thing.
Right. Do you think that perception will ever get shattered, or is the marketing good enough where it's just, as long as they call it a crossover or a SUV or whatever they want to call it, it's just inherently going to be worth more because adventure?
I don't even think it's really the adventure side, because most people don't even use them for exploring the world. They still just drive them to Walmart.
Right.
But it's the feeling of safety, having better visibility on the road. That in itself, I think, justifies the cost to people. Because they're higher up, they feel safer, they can see more. Whereas I've got in the UK, I've got an old BMW 5 Series, but I went from driving a Toyota Hilux to driving that.
Jeez.
And it's suddenly, it does feel like you're sitting on the floor, because I'm used to driving a truck, and they're not much different in length and width wise, but that height wise makes a huge difference in where you feel you're placed on the road, especially when more and more other vehicles are crossovers and SUVs.
Mm-hmm.
It creates that sort of need, that the comfort you get from having a higher driving position. I think just justifies it to a lot of people. They feel safer with it.
Yeah, I think that is something that we might overlook in our discussion of this. I think we tend to scoff at the parking lot queen Land Cruisers, and because I think a lot of us in the United States especially live through, in my background in particular, going to a private school, I lived through the UN relief convoys that were field trips. When you've got 3 Land Cruisers and actual Hummer, it's like people are driving their kids on school field trips in UN relief vehicles. We all should have been wearing blue helmets. But I think having lived through that, I think a lot of us tend to like write it off towards this. Oh, I could take it off road someday, and that's why people are buying them. But I think you bring up a good point of just that visibility and that place on the road is something that I hadn't even really thought about that until you said it. Because having driven both, I went from a Toyota 4Runner to a Jeep Grand Cherokee, and then I worked my way down to an Outback, and now I'm in a WRX. And I kind of slid down the size scale there pretty rapidly. And
the Miata next for you,
right?
So the BRZ, isn't it?
BRZ, yeah.
Oh, right. Yep. Yeah. Whatever that is.
And I don't, and yeah, you don't see things. I feel like I have to get out and look behind me before I back out of parking spots because I'm between 2 pickup trucks, and that's something that, although it has occurred to me, like I felt that, it never occurred to me as that would be why someone would buy one. But that's a interesting point. I don't think the 3 of us have ever really discussed. We tend to write it off as the, American, misplaced lust for adventure. But maybe it's
I think that's part of it, because it is just
part of it. Yeah.
You can go, well, I now have this SUV, even if it's only a 2-wheel drive one, but I don't really know what that means. So,
right.
I'm sure a lot of people are buying them thinking that they're, buying a 4-wheel drive, something that's capable off road, and they're just buying, the 2-wheel drive version. I'm sure that happens now and again. But, people are buying, thinking, well, yeah, if I do want to go camping, or if I want to go away and do a road trip, then we do have, we have all the room to put stuff in. Whereas, say, in the US market, where there isn't an abundance of wagons, which, Europe is, filled with, wagons. So people get that same kind of utility of having that extra load space.
Don't get me
whereas
started.
That market isn't here. It's a sore point for I think many auto enthusiasts in the US that you don't get those manual diesel wagons that we do.
Manual diesel wagons. Oh yeah, super popular.
Hey, you shut up.
Yeah, fine.
Before the 4Runner,
don't argue in front of the guest.
Before the 4Runner, were 2 Volkswagen group wagons, an A4 and a
they weren't brown or diesel, so or manual.
But
anyways,
it could have been all those things.
One thing that I do have to ask about, since we're talking about cost and the idea of safety, it almost feels at times to me that there is an element of classism in the race to make EVs and the race to make SUVs, because when I wrote my blog about SUVs, I pulled some stats from Edmunds about the cost. So for example, Hyundai Accent and a Hyundai Kona are about $8,000 apart. Something in the compact class would be about another $8,000. Then when you get up to midsize, the difference between a midsize car and the SUV that's based on the same platform is about $12,000. It just seems like at some point it has to have a social effect, right? At some point, people can only afford small cars, and then there is no cheap SUV option, really.
Well, I think this actually comes back to the Ford situation. The Ford could be see the writing on the wall and think, times are going to get tough soon. We've had economic expansion for more than 10 years now. In the way our economy works, there is going to be another recession. There is going to be a period of contraction. And Ford may have seen the writing on the wall and said, we need to really focus. We need to trim the fat so we can make it through the next recession like we did the last one. And if the market, demands more for, SUVs while they're doing it, they're going to keep charging for it.
Yeah.
But I would think what we're probably going to see, when the next, economic downturn does come, the prices of the Expedition are going to come down. Mm-hmm. They're not going, because let me quickly have a look. I think the average transactional price of buying an Expedition now is like near enough $50,000.
Jeez.
And that's that is not gonna hold up when they can't sell any because people are broke. So those prices aren't gonna come down. Right at the moment, I think we are at the top end. You could have probably said this for the last 3 or 4 years.
Mm-hmm.
There is only so much market to go around, and everyone's fighting for what is now increasingly smaller markets, but with more and more options. So it's a hyper competitive environment, and the prices that we're seeing today on new cars, especially the more premium end of things, are going to come down because the market is not going to be able to support that when money becomes tight again.
That's interesting, because I'm just thinking back to our last economic collapse. Ford, my impression of it was that Ford did well during that time because maybe it was coincidence, maybe it was foresight, but at the time when America had their last recession, Ford was making really, really good small cars because they suddenly realized, hey, we have all these Euro models, let's just bring them over here. And they happened to sell well, like the Ford ZX3 and that was the focus. Yeah, the ZX3 and stuff like that. So I guess my thought was the next time a recession hits, people are going to want to go back to those small cars, right? I remember my mom was looking at buying a car kind of just in that time, and people were counting 1 or 2 miles per gallon as like found gold. It was kind of insane the way people treated that MPG. And of course, now we're again in a market where everyone's buying those SUVs and CUVs. So it just seems almost like Hyundai's going to do really well with all those accents when it happens again. But you're thinking prices could just come crashing down on the same vehicles. Yeah,
well, you're going to be able to get a lot better. The sticker prices will probably come down a bit. But then, when you go into the dealers and they're absolutely desperate, you're going to be able to get a huge amount off the sticker price, I would expect. And what will happen is say things like the Expedition will continue to sales will go down. They will continue their long-term trend of going down, but you'll think like, what is it, like the Escape, which is like the sort of smaller compact one?
Yes, the mid-size.
Yes, correct.
Yeah, like something like that. People will not buy an Expedition; they'll buy one of those instead.
Gotcha.
Because the efficiency now of some of the smaller compacts and mid-size crossovers are really good. They're not terrible, especially for the size of the vehicles that they are. So you're not going to get that much. I think the compact buyer will buy compacts. People will buy compacts still, but they're still going to buy crossovers. They're not going to buy little. They're not going to buy a Volkswagen Golf. They're not going to buy a Ford Focus. They're going to say they're going to buy a Ford Escape, or they're going to buy whatever smaller crossover that Ford or whoever happens to make.
Sure. So it's kind of like you're thinking a permanent shift now, where like this is just where we are.
Yeah, I think that's the SUV. I don't think is going anywhere because it's kind of self-fulfilling, and you say like based on this idea that when everyone around you has one of these bigger vehicles, you're going to buy one as well. What's the shift? What shift is going to be required to make people go to smaller vehicles that aren't that much more fuel efficient?
Right. It would have to be one hell of a recession.
Yeah, you say you can upsell people on bigger cargo space, more practicality, and all that kind of thing, but you can't really sell them on, well, a smaller car would be better. You don't need to have 3 suitcases. You can get away with 2. That's not a selling point of why you would want to downscale even more.
All right. Well, I think if we had a soundbite for a trigger warning, now's when we'd have to play it because. We can't get out of this without talking about last night's big news. And, of course, Nick is very sensitive to this topic. But the C8 is here. It's for real, and it's actually mid-engined. let's talk about this risk that Chevy's taking. Whether or not Loaf, do you think this is worth it for GM?
Well, someone else go first because I do have actually opinions on this. Believe it or not.
Great!
I want to save them so everyone else can have their say.
I'll start then. I gotta say, and I'm not just saying this for the meme. I honestly think it looks great. I'm a sucker for a target top. So just the fact that there's now a mid-engine Corvette, starting price around $60,000, in that 5 to 7 year window, when we see the Corvette depreciation, that could be a car that I might actually want to for real buy. That's how much I like it, despite the absolutely hilarious array of buttons. I genuinely laughed when I saw that image because it looks like Neo's coat from The Matrix Reloaded, and it's absurd. But I love it. I mean, I think it could work. It honestly, the whole thing worked on me already, so I think I have to say that it has to be worth it for GM. Nick, what do you think?
Oh man, Loaf, I am not against the idea of GM making, relatively speaking, entry-level mid-engine sports car. I have nothing wrong with that. I think it could honestly result in a massive wake-up call for these other sports car brands who are making these things. We brought up the NSX earlier for over 100,000. If this Corvette can cut it in half with the same performance numbers, like, that's almost paradigm shifting. But my problem with this whole thing is, why not call it something else? Just because of what the Corvette is and always has been, it was designed as a front-engine, rear-drive sports car, and it essentially conquered the world in that configuration. I have no problem with GM making a car like this, but just brand it something else.
All right, Tristan.
This is one of the times where, I'm kind of right in the middle. I don't see a problem with naming it the Corvette. I think that things can change, and I think anybody who knows me a lot knows I'm kind of actually uncomfortable with change. But in my mind, I know that things can change, and I think that conquering the world as a front driver engine car, when front driver engine cars were conquering the world, is great. But now, mid-engine cars are conquering the world, and I think it's time to show that you can conquer the world there. And I don't think the name is as important, but I also don't have. I didn't have a connection to it to begin with. I was just like, yeah, Corvettes. Those are the sports cars that GM makes. And the fact that it's mid-engine now has no impact on me personally. I don't have a family history. I don't have a personal history. I've sat in a running Corvette twice if you count both legs of a road trip. So I agree with Andrew. I'm entirely sold on the outside. The steering wheel makes my eyes water a little bit.
I don't know what they're thinking. Also, how can they not have the little, the center rondels go up and then shape the buttons like the Corvette flags? Come on. This is super basic anyways.
Yeah, and the steering wheel makes my eyes water. The touchscreen does, as Nick pointed out, look like an iPad duct taped to the dashboard. And that row of buttons is hilarious. But that being said, if I can get something that'll go toe-to-toe with an NSX or even higher for $60,000, I mean, Andrew, you were mentioning this is something you could potentially buy. I'm entirely on board with that. If it comes down in the next 5-6 years and is a $40,000 used car,
ooh,
why not? I mean, it's going to be the first generation when they're a mid-engine, and maybe if the Corvette people go for it, there'll be some collector value. It might not come down that far, but it leaves the door open for that happening later on. And suddenly you have me, who I was not interested in a front engine, rear drive Corvette, even at the lower price tiers, because it wasn't that exciting to me. Having something in that price tier that's going to give you, supercar numbers from, that match up with things with names like an NSX, things like that, that's much more exciting to me personally, just because of the configuration. So I think you open a new market, with the risk of potentially closing an old one, and not even just age old. It's not even older people; it's younger people who have more of a history with Corvette, like Nick. So I'm still jury's out on whether it's going to pay off for them. Me personally, I am very in on the new Corvette personally, but I don't know. I still question whether it's going to work out for them.
Okay, your turn, Loaf.
Okay.
Yeah, that's all we got to say.
Well, so I'm, a bit of everything that you've said I can kind of agree with. I've never been a fan of the Corvette. I don't dislike it, but I've just never had it's never done anything for me. I've never seen a Corvette and gone, oh wow, one day I want to own one of those. Mm-hmm. It's never ever been my thing. I can look like, especially like there was the Stingray from the 60s. Sure. You can look at something like that and go, that's a really cool looking car. But the general Corvette lineup has done nothing for me ever. But when I see the C8 get do its unveiling yesterday, I was like, yeah, I like this. This is actually probably the first new car in, I don't know, 4 or 5 years, apart from like the Honda Urban EV. I've gone, yeah. I actually want to own this. I really like this. The interior is interesting, but I'm not going to hold it against any of it. I can see why people don't like it, but I think for what my sort of mental picture of what a Corvette's supposed to be, that interior works for me. I mean, yeah, if I'm buying a Corvette, I like that interior. That I'm happy with that. I don't care if the passenger can touch the controls. It's my car. Go away.
Go away. Don't even look at the touchscreen. Get out of here.
Yeah, exactly. This is driver's car, isn't it? It's not, that's kind of my take on it. It's like, the car is not for the passenger. The car is for the person driving. Mm-hmm. And it's like, yeah, I've never been interested in a Corvette before, and I am now. So even if they do alienate some of their long-time Corvette fans, well, okay, well, what are they going to buy instead?
A Camaro?
Nick, can you answer that question?
Camaro, Mustang.
How about an 8 Series?
Yeah.
Is someone that's a big fan of a Corvette really going to buy an 8 Series? I don't know. That's a very small cross-shopping window, I think.
I'm just trying to think front, rear. Lexus LC is the only thing.
I mean, obviously, there are options for front engine, rear drive cars. But you're talking about Corvette guys that are not going to buy a Corvette because of this. They're not going to go. I would imagine a real Corvette guy is not going to go buy a Mustang.
No, he probably won't.
Oh, of course not.
So it's like if they're not going to buy the mid-engine Corvette because they're being petty about it, you've got 50 years of Corvettes with the engine in where you want it. If they're not going to buy it for that, they're going to buy a Camaro. So GM gets the money either way. So
yeah.
I think this is the 100% best thing Chevy could have done, because it's opened the market up to more people. I am now, for the first time in my life, interested in what they're going to do with this Corvette.
Me too, and Tristan as well. I mean, it seems to have actually worked for real.
Which that's actually more concerning than anything else. I don't know.
And I'd like to put that in the context. Well, I'm not even a guy that's really into like mid-engine cars. My favorite Ferraris are front engine. Like I'm not that into mid-engine. But when you're talking about it's a GM car, it's a Corvette that's $60,000 in its mid-engine, and it's going to be relatively, one would assume, cheap to maintain, heavily modifiable. Mm-hmm. They're going to build a load of them. What is not to like about this? This is taking the mistakes with like what Honda did with the NSX and going, right, let's get rid of all the unnecessary bits. Let's just make it, the core as good as possible. Don't worry about the fluff, and hopefully that's what they've done.
Yeah, I'm hoping
lowering that price point. If it was 80,000, 100,000, I'd be like, oof. I mean, it's still going to open the market, I think. But when the entry level is 60,000, that you're competing against some strong but not that good, front engine rear drive competition. That's a big selling point to have this much more focused experience, I think. So it's going to open the market up to a lot more people.
Yeah, I'm just thinking. My last blog about the C8 was me advancing a theory that the base model C8 would have to at least compete on a track with the NSX in order to be perceived as quote unquote worth it by people who kind of watch, Corvette racing. I mean, it just seemed to me like that would be the reasonable comparison. If for no other reason, then yes, Acura is a Japanese brand, quote unquote. That whole entire car, the NSX, is built right in Ohio. And every car-related thing in Ohio brags about that. I mean, Mid-Ohio is where they tested it. It's this, it's that, the factory. And, just based off of these original impressions, not only does the Corvette seem in line to make that completely false and made-up benchmark that I set for no reason, but it also seems like GM built this Corvette in the exact same way that Acura built the NSX. It's just that, with the hybrid technology, that NSX is always going to be $100,000 more, and it's the only mid-engine car even within striking distance price-wise. I mean, other ones are 3 or 4 times more than $60,000. So it's just, I mean, if it works and if the performance numbers are there, I can't see this being anything other than. It seems like a home run, like a total coup for
absolute
GM.
Smash.
Yeah. No, I think they've done everything right, and that's obviously we still don't know the full specs or anything like that, but everything that I saw yesterday, and the general reactions of people as well online, has been overwhelmingly positive. People have criticisms, but it's not saying, well, this is a waste of time, this isn't going to sell. Because it doesn't matter. The NSX can be a great car and the greatest car ever, or like I think like the newer Ford GT. These are in theory competitors that are so much more expensive and completely unobtainable for most people. They know you can't even imagine owning one of those cars. Most people, whereas say you can look at this Corvette and go, wow, in 5-8 years time, I could see myself in one of those. That's much more attainable, and for people that are actually just buying the cars, buying new cars, a $60,000 mid-engine sports car, that's a strong sell.
$60,000 sports car is a strong sell.
Yeah,
much less a mid-engine.
So they have done everything right so far, and I think it's going to sell really, really well because it's just, like I say, it's opened that market up to much more people, and the stuff like the NSX or the Ford GT or other mid-engine cars, most of them are bleeding-edge technological showcases of what can be done in various ways, and a lot of those not that interesting to the people that buy them. Whereas the Corvette is just like, here's a fast car, we put the engine in the middle, well balanced, enjoy it.
Yeah, there you go.
That's what I think enthusiasts want, and at a price that they can afford. So I think it's going to sell really well, and nearly everything I've seen has been pretty positive, apart from people that would never buy one anyway. So.
Right, of course. So Nick, I assume that completely changed your mind. Now you're fully on board.
I agree with pretty much everything you guys are saying about the fact that it's going to sell and the fact that it's going to, like, at that price point, if that's what the price point is going to be, it is going to be a coup, or like I had mentioned, like a paradigm shift in how this all works. But man, Loaf, they mentioned I had a history, like my dad has had Corvettes since before I was born. So there's been a 63 split window in my garage. There's been an 86 C4. There's been a 97 C5. My dad actually had a 69 Stingray that he sold when my mom was pregnant with me, that he bought not just the same model, but the exact same VIN, like the same car back as a retirement present for himself. So we've always had Corvettes in the family. And so I'm just saying, call it something else. You can have a mid-engine car like this from GM that just takes the market by storm. But bring the Firebird name back. Anything, call it something else.
Anything. It just feels so bad for you, man.
My fandom ended at 10 p.m. Central last night.
Well, listen, I will take that Corvette flag and hang it up in my house because I'm going to buy one of those someday. You can
have it. You can have it.
All right. Loaf, I think we've taken up enough of your time. I really cannot thank you enough for coming on with us. This has been incredible.
I'm glad to be here. I hope it all went well, and I didn't go on too many long rambles about inconsequential things.
No. It's all
consequential because we learned pretty much every time you opened your mouth, and I think our listeners did too. So my question is this: can we have you back again? Because this was awesome.
Yep, more than happy to come back on. It's cool to talk to you guys, and one of those things. I've been planning on doing my own podcast for quite a while, but I've decided it's much easier just to be guests on other people's because it's a lot. I think people that listen to podcasts don't necessarily realize the amount of work and effort that can go into them sometimes. Just like even just getting the scheduling right can be a laborious task. Yeah, so how long it took to get this episode together. It's a lot harder than people realize, and they say I've decided that my way of doing this is let other people do the hard work, and I'll just talk.
Well, if you're not going to do a podcast, if our listeners want to get more of your insight, more of your wisdom, where can they go find you?
Just go to my Twitter, ArtisanLoaf, and that's about it. I'm one of the few people that do podcasts that don't have anything to sell people, and I like to keep it that way because I'm just me giving my opinions. I'm not trying to sell you anything. I don't have a Patreon that you should subscribe to or anything like that. Just if you like what I've had to say, then check me out on Twitter at ArtisanLoaf, and that's all I want. That's it.
Perfect.
We're gonna save our round of thank yous because really the only thank you here is obviously to ArtisanLoaf for taking time out of his vacation to join us. Like Andrew said, we appreciate this so much. This is so cool for us, and I'm sure for our listeners as well. If you like this and you want to let us know how much you enjoyed this, get at us, reach out to us. You can start by doing that at checkenginepodcast.com. We have an email there, inbox@checkenginepodcast.com. You can also find us on all the socials. We're on Facebook at Check Engine Podcast. Andrew, we're on Twitter as well, correct?
Yeah, at Check Engine Pod.
And Tristan, the Instagram is what?
Also at Check Engine Pod.
So please hit us up on there.
You can follow our Twitter. It's mostly just ArtisanLoaf retweets. So
you follow
maybe
him
just follow
directly,
him.
it's easier. Yep.
Just follow him. Just skip us. Just skip the middleman. He is at ArtisanLoaf.
That's right.
If you're really, really, really into what we're doing, unlike ArtisanLoaf, we actually do have a Patreon page. We will take your money. Patreon.com/CheckEnginePodcast, or we also have a support button right on our Anchor FM page. Anything that goes in there comes out with what we hope is better content for you, the listener. Also, if you have a second, click that subscribe button. That way it's free, and all that happens is that you'll know when we have something new coming out. If you like us, it's kind of a no-brainer. And if you want to take a second to leave us a review, we would really appreciate that as well, because in the whole algorithm of podcast searches, our value goes up if we get good reviews. So we thank you for that. We thank you for listening all the way through, even though you can tell we're not pros. One last time, thank you, ArtisanLoaf. Thanks to all of you for tuning in. We cannot wait to talk to you again. Take care.